This is Carm and Foster.
Mahir.
And we're going to be talking about our language journeys. We have a peppermint candle lit, and I am working on a geometric and rose coloring sheet.
And I have a Pokemon coloring sheet.
And which Pokemon do you have?
My opinion, very biased. The best of Gen 1, Blastoise.
And what's he doing on there?
I don't know, it looks like he's running or posing or something.
What's the 009 stand for?
He's number 9 in the Pokedex.
Oh, okay. Does he have something to do with, what is that, water?
And he's a water type.
Okay.
It's the evolution of Squirtle.
Okay.
And you know Squirtle's my favorite.
Yeah. What's this on his back?
It's his cannons, where he shoots water out of.
Oh, shit.
He's the only Pokemon with a weapon attached to his body.
Okay, that's funny. That's cool. Good to know.
It's not why I like him, but it's cool.
Okay. Cool. So we're going to start with Foster. So tell us about your language journey.
Well, I first heard Lakota when I was in the stars. Just kidding.
You shit. I looked at you like, oh shit, okay.
No, I'm just kidding. Probably though, but thinking back to growing up in my childhood, it was there at home. Didn't have a fluent speaker in the house or anything like that. My grandparents endured the boarding schools like most of our grandparents, so they weren't fortunate enough to keep the language, but they did know some, which is what I learned, just nouns basically. And then aside from that, we had like 30-minute classes in elementary school, and that was pretty basic: colors and numbers, nouns, animals, but it wasn't like nothing conversational, so the fluency level was very beginner, and that went all the way to middle school. Same, it's like an elective. I went to a public school, so.
Were you aware of it being like your native language?
Not to the depth of my understanding now.
Like no one like emphasized that to you?
It's just like, yeah, we're Lakota, but it wasn't like the reason why we should learn the language was never explicitly stated. It's just like, oh, it's Lakota class now. Get out your Lakota books. That type of setting. And then once getting into middle school, it changed from being majority language and delved into more of like history as well, history and culture, and more so history. And it wasn't like pre-contact history. I'm sure it was a little bit, but what I remember mostly is like reservation era history and leading up to like 70s probably. That's when it stopped.
Okay.
But we didn't even get into like, what is a tribe? Why do we have one?
Yeah.
What's tribal government? What's sovereignty? Like, we never had those types of discussions either, which I think is very important to understanding the why of learning a language. What about you?
When I first started learning the language, I think one of my first words that I learned growing up from like my dad. By the way, my dad's white for anyone who doesn't know, and I was raised by my dad. So was the word gajo, which I feel like is so common across native kids, but I just knew gajo as like diarrhea. But like I thought, I didn't know that that was Lakota. And then it wasn't until like third grade when I was at Pure Indian Learning Center where we actually took classes, and those were in the basement of this like dome building where we had computer class. When I got older, it was in the upstairs, like the attic, and there was computers up there for the older kids to use. I learned the X orthography, and my teacher was Violet Catches, who a lot of people probably know or are learning the language from Violet, and I'm pretty sure she still lives in Pierre. But that was my first like exposure to it. And and I actually still have my worksheets from way back then. Like I don't know why, but I saved all of my Lakota language work from that class. And I don't know why or how, but like when I left in seventh grade, I must have like taken my homework home to back to White River, and then as I like aged and got older, I know like I moved houses from my old house to new house and kept it. And I always remember coming across that yellow folder with all my stuff in it and being like, I'm gonna keep this. And I don't know why, but I did. And I still do have it actually now that we live in White River in this house. I have gone through that box again and have found that folder, and like I've looked at it, and it's pretty cool, to see. But when I got into high school, I remember, unlike you, like we had Spanish or Lakota, and one of my best friends, she's non-native, and she was like, I would take Spanish because you're never gonna use Lakota and you'll actually use Spanish. And so I was like, okay. And so I took Spanish with her and a few of my other friends. And I look back and I'm like, damn it. But it's okay. So for college, what about you? Because I know that's like once it starts like really becoming serious for you, right, Lakota?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I was laughing to myself because I feel like every Lakota child has that experience or that epiphany moment when they learn gajo is not an English word.
Oh, yeah.
Because I had that same thing.
Oh, okay.
It's like so common to know that one. Or Team Sila. Those two are so common, which is interesting that they're so normalized, but that's it. Actually, like conversations isn't normalized.
Oh, yeah.
But yeah, so for me, I didn't even talk about high school. But high school,
Oh, yeah.
it was offered as an elective, but in order to be a Regent scholar, you had to take Spanish.
That's okay, my experience too was the Regent Scholar stuff that I was like shooting for.
Right.
Had to be
Same.
2 years, right?
Just one.
Oh, okay.
I only took it for one. I took Spanish for 1 year, and then I didn't take the second one. I had like 3 classes my senior year. It was a very easy year, but I was at AP Calc, so I didn't want to like take too much and risk my GPA, so I didn't take what was beyond necessary. That's why I didn't take 2, so that's why I know it's just 1 year. But yeah, for college, for those that don't know my undergraduate experience, I went to Stanford University in the Bay Area. The pandemic caused my experience to be cut short.
And it's not an Ivy League.
Yeah, it's not an Ivy League.
And me and my friends from who I went to college with would tease him. And we still do. We'll still say Ivy League boy. Nah, I'm just kidding. But we'll still say that and he'll still correct us. So yeah, it's not actually an Ivy League.
Yeah. So anywho, went out there. I was out there for 2.5 years, and then the pandemic hit. So I was fortunate enough, they have a special languages program there, and they teach Lakota, Cherokee, Dene, and one of the Hawaiian dialects.
Hmm.
So I was fortunate enough to have that opportunity to learn language, even though I was damn near halfway across the country, away from the homelands. So, and my instructor was Dr. Delphine Redshirt. She's Oglala from Pine Ridge, fluent speaker, first language speaker. And I was very fortunate for that experience because I truly believe that's what kept me grounded and was able to persevere through the other classes that had no grounding or culture or anything to it. It's just take it for the sake of taking it. So, yeah, that was foundational for me because there it was actually learning grammar and learning how to speak and write. And I took about 4 or 5 classes. So we didn't have semesters, we had quarters.
Oh, yeah.
But the 4th quarter is optional during the summertime. So technically it's like 3 quarters trimesters. So I didn't take 2 full years of it due to the pandemic. But I did take as much as I could. But yeah, learned a lot of grammar. And what she emphasized was it's important to learn the grammar first, because once you learn that, you can pick up words and vocabulary on your own. And I resonate with that because it's kind of true. Because we have resources now, you know, we have dictionaries and things that we can look up words on our phones and whatever. So that was my experience. And the classwork, it wasn't like textbook style or anything like that. We had like 3 mini projects within the quarter, and it would be translating children's books.
Were you like shocked that language could be learned in that way, like taught and learned? Because it seems pretty advanced, like a big gap to jump into that from your high school experience, probably, right?
Yeah. Because for Spanish, it was very textbook with some translating projects. But for this, in Lakota's, we had the Blue Bugle dictionary. That's pretty thorough. And then we had I forget what it's called, like 500 Dakota verbs or something. It's like an orange book. And we used that to help with conjugations and structure. And Delphine would teach us the syntax of sentences and things like that. So with that, we would run our translations through her, and she would advise like which words are more appropriate than others for like cultural reasons, or just grammatically, it just makes more sense to a speaker. So that was cool, but it was very like, you try first and come back, not I'm going to give you the translation that you're looking for.
Okay.
So I like that.
That's cool.
But I know that's different from your experience in college.
Yeah, I always like when we talk about our experiences because they're so different. And you guys didn't use an orthography, right?
She taught using Albert's. She wasn't real strict about it, as long as we knew how to say it properly.
Okay.
So we could write it without markings, with markings, in a different ortho, whatever. But as long as because we would present our translated books, and that was our real test of how we sounded when we spoke.
Okay.
So that was that. But the lesson she took was from the Albert reading and writing Lakota language.
Okay.
But share your experience.
Okay, so and you signed up for your class, right? Like you seen it, you sought it out, um, and you wanted to take it.
Yep. So Delphine's daughter Megan, I went to a college prep summer program, and she was one of the coordinators and advisors for that program. And once I told her I was committed to going to Stanford, then she told me that her mom works there. These are the classes she teaches. So I was like, cool. Well, be happy to meet her and take her classes. It was just like a no-brainer to stick to the other Lakota.
Mm.
And it just made sense because it was interesting. And at that time, I wasn't very clear on my degree. Ended up graduating with a BA in Native American Studies, and language counts towards it. You have to have a language. But the fact that it was a special language counted towards the Native American Studies degree.
Mm.
And then she also taught history, Native American literature, Native American history, and a couple others. So.
And you used the language? Did you use the online dictionary?
At that time, I didn't.
Oh, okay.
We just had Bugle's Blue Book, the Blue Bible, if you will.
Oh, okay.
I didn't even know about. I was just first learning about the LLC.
Oh, okay.
So I didn't even have experience or exposure to that.
What year was that? When you were taking those classes?
The fall of 17 and 18, 19.
Okay. That's wild, yeah. Okay, so I wanted to just clarify that because, like, for me, I had like Native studies in general, like Native stuff in general. Like, I went to University of South Dakota, and I went there. I was interested in the health field, and I still love public health, but I found my way towards public health. And my first year being a freshman, I'm pretty sure people have seen me share this story, but I had an advisor, and it was Carol Bossword, and she was like, "Do you want to take a Native Studies course? Do you want to take a language class?" And I was like, "No." And I didn't want to, and she kept asking me, and every semester, like I think the first year, my first 2 semesters, and maybe that second year, I can't remember. But I always felt like, ugh, no, I don't want to take language. I don't want to take those Native study courses. Like, I didn't want to. And I honestly don't know where that really stemmed from. But I remember getting into like the Native studies courses because of my friends talking about like the treaties, and they were preparing for an exam, and I overheard them talking about it, and then I became interested, and then they were also like taking the language courses too, and then I was like, shit, I'll take it with you then. So I did, and me and my friends were taking these courses together, and our instructor was Armik Mirzan, and he was a really good instructor. The content was very difficult, I would say.
And Armik's on a previous episode.
Yeah, yep. Armik was a guest on our podcast. He's really good at speaking Lakota and teaching it and like the grammar and stuff. He spent time around native fluent speakers and learned the language that way. He also knows like quite a few different other languages too. So he had really tough curriculum, I would say. I know I struggled with it, but I also had like competing priorities in college as like a freshman, like 19-year-old, 20-year-old, 21-year-old. You know, you're your priorities like are stacked. You are focusing on your major. And I ended up getting a minor in teaching Lakota language through the teaching methods course and like all the language courses. But I would say that I did struggle, and um, I feel like I couldn't commit myself entirely to Lakota learning. My friends like did really well. We had a few presentations too where we had to stand up and like present in Lakota, which I was really nervous about. Remember in the beginning learning pronunciation, and I was so nervous to like say like the gutturals.
Hmm.
I remember that in my first class being like, "Oh my god, I don't want to say kh and kha and stuff like that." And I like didn't want to say none of those, and it was so uncomfortable. Like I wanted to laugh, and I had to hold back sometimes from laughing. But it's like just my own discomfort as a beginning learner. And eventually, like, gee, now, like, those are so normal. Like, it's so normal. And it's really cool. But yeah, I remember, like, just not understanding some things sometimes and being overwhelmed and frustrated and wishing that it would come easy for me as it did for some of my classmates. And, um, but Armic was always like such a good instructor, so patient, compassionate, and also had like high expectations for us too. And I remember I was learning, and I one of my first year before I took those classes, um, I was talking to my friend Miko, and I remember saying to him, we were talking about the word woman in Lakota, which is wian. And I remember saying Winyan. And then I giggled. I was like, because it sounded funny. I was like, Winyan. And Miko kind of looked at me, and he was like, he gave me that look. And then when he proceeded to talk to me about the language, it was like, all right, sit down.
Gonna learn today.
Girl, sit down. But I remember there was like a couple of words that I was just like not pronouncing right. And I remember also another one, like people on Facebook have like Lexi in front of their name. I remember one time someone had that, and I was like, oh, Lexi. Like, I thought it was like Lexi, like the name Lexi. And I was like, Lexi, what does that mean? And then someone was like, what the fuck? Like, that means uncle, dude. And I was like, oh shit, like, this is a cultural word. I had no idea. And, man, I've come a long way. but, but, like, it just kind of showed me, like, in college, how much exposure to, like, being Native in general. Being Lakota in general. Because, like I said, I grew up with my dad who's white. And he knows a lot of things that are cultural, but he didn't speak. And so, yeah. So I took all the language classes, and I loved them so much. I learned so much. I kept all of my homework and all of my worksheets and tests and exams and everything from that. I remember one of my first presentations in Lakota was about the Tashiagnupa. And I already knew what the meadowlark was because my dad taught me about meadowlarks when I was a kid when we would go fishing. And I just loved how they sounded. And it didn't make sense, like later on hearing about the stories about Kashiagnupa. So yeah, and when I took my teaching methods course with two other Native students, and Armic was there, he couldn't be the instructor. It was a German teaching German language teacher, instructor. He didn't understand Lakota language or indigenous languages. So when I went to do my lesson, it was on conjugations for praying and smudging and singing for people, like in a cultural way. And he didn't agree with it because he was like, yeah, do something that you're actually going to actually use And Armic had my back, and he's like, she is gonna use those. You do sing for people, you do smudge people, you do pray for people. Like, that's part of her culture. She is gonna use this for her lesson. And I was like, oh my god, it's so hard for this instructor to understand. He was white, and I remember my classmate was like talking about singing, and the instructor was like, oh, singing songs, yeah, that's really great. Like the tune of it, sounds really good, nice beat to it and everything. And my classmate was like, no, like singing is like a prayer to the spirits, and it's a way to heighten your voice to up to the sky. And it's not like music. It's not like that. It's different. And I think he was referring to like a prayer song. And it was so hard for us to kind of explain that cultural like sensitivity to our instructor, because we were all using Lakota for our teaching methods course. And that is how I learned about immersion, because one of our assignments was to interview somebody who teaches a language. And it didn't have to be immersion. It didn't have to be Lakota. It could be any indigenous language. It could be any language. It could be Spanish, German, whatever, a European language, something not English. And so I had learned about Sierra through one of my friends. Her sister Miriam had posted that she got her degree and she's going to be teaching immersion. And I was like, wow, that's so freaking cool. And I contacted her and I said, you teach immersion. Can I interview you for my assignment? My assignment has a list of questions I'm supposed to ask. Can we set up a time to meet? And she was like, yeah, for sure. And so I interviewed Sierra, Moshke Sierra, her many horses now, then was Concha. And it was such a influential interview that I felt like it really influenced me a lot. And I just was like geeked out about it. I was like, man, I found someone who speaks our language and teaches our children, our native Lakota children, our language, and it's all complete immersion. I was like, this is the perfect interview to present to my class and share with my instructor. Like, see, here is our language being used. And ever since then, I, had always followed what, Sierra's work, and then Makabialuta, their school. And yeah, but it's crazy how, like, it came from, like, it went from that to our school when I was at Wakaya Educator Kayakti, like working with them. And like I remember being at the PD in one of the classrooms at Makabialuta that summer, and I looked around the room and I seen Sierra. I was like, hey, and she's like, hi. And so like just how that happened, I don't know, it's really cool. I always think back to that and appreciate from like that was like in 2018, I think. Yeah, that teaching methods course.
Just a full circle moment there.
Yeah. Yep. So
Well, shout out Armic and shout out Sierra if you're
yeah.
listening.
Yep. Shout out.
Many whoops.
Mm-hmm. Very impressionable or influential people in language work.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So like after college, like how did you start to use the language? I know you like taught me so much going into like 2019, 2020 with like the pandemic and plants. Like I learned so much from you with language.
Yeah, those are wild times. Yeah, I was very ambitious. I was proud to know something of something.
Something of something.
Yeah, not saying I knew everything because I don't, but I was just proud to share like what I did know and what I was learning because I felt inspired. And so I took what I knew and just took Delphine's words of like, just go learn vocab now. And so I did. And I bridged my passions and interest of indigenous food sovereignty, traditional ecological knowledge, TEK, and found words that best described my interests. So I was interning at the Sichangu Food Sovereignty Initiative. I did that for 3 summers through Stanford. It was a work study program. And there I was able to implement language in the garden. Just basic, like mainstream fruits and vegetables. And then named their beginner farmer rancher program let's see if I remember it, the Wa'ichahe Ichaha Bikte. It just means like they're going to develop into producers. Like they're going to learn these skills and become farmer ranchers, pretty much. And so, instances like that, I made signs for the garden that they could post up for people that come to tour or just for their own language learning and acquisition. And then getting into the traditional foods of foraging, the timsila, the champra, kanta, the wild turnip, chokecherries and blooms, and even the greens, the plants, the pateo micha, the ground plum, things like that. That was my biggest influence, I feel like, because it's real. You're gonna learn the plant anyway. You might as well learn its name in Lakota. That's kind of how I was thinking of it, how I still think of it today. Might as well cram your memory with the language if you're gonna learn something. And so that was my take on it, and still doing that, still learning about plants, still foraging, and learning the Lakota for it. So that was my experience after college. And then what year was that?
That was 2020? 2019, 2020?
Yeah.
2018-ish?
And then when did I start at the school? 21?
Yeah.
Okay. That makes sense. So 21, graduated with my bachelor's in the spring. And then that fall, like the beginning of August, middle of August, there was a job opening. I was an intern at Food Sovereignty Initiative through their initiative this time in that program, the WIC program. And there's a job posting that they needed a Lakota foods coordinator. And essentially what that was the cook for the school. And so I applied. It's like, might as well, I'm graduated now, I don't have classes, I can do a full-time job. You were working there, and it just seemed interesting. It seemed like a good opportunity to implement a lot of food sovereignty work. So I applied, found out a couple weeks later that I got it right before school started, and that's really where I started to implement the Lakota farm to school program there. While in the language, working with Leland, Lexi Leland, our fluent speaker, learning about foods, trying to start up basically a local food procurement program where we sourced locally, intertribally, wild rice from Minnesota, so things like that, and then teaching it to the kids what they're eating.
And not using milk.
Yep, no dairy, no breads. If it was going to be like cornmeal, cornbread,
or
tortillas.
Timsila, ground Timsila.
Yeah. So that really helped, especially working with Leland. Learned a lot from him.
Because he knows plants too.
Yep.
You guys plants. Connected on that.
Yeah. We vibed on that a lot. So that was my experience.
Like leading up to the school.
And then share yours.
Okay, so...
Because you had a different route. You graduated before I did.
Oh yeah.
So you were
Just a
already.
year, right? Or was it 2 years?
When did you graduate?
2019. Yeah, it
Two
was
years.
just okay.
So you were already in the workforce.
Oh yeah. Yep. Okay. Oh yeah. So yeah, before so when I graduated, when I was getting ready to graduate, I had two options. I was either going to go into my master's for public health um, with the University of North Dakota, and I actually did. I did start taking my classes. My other option was to go into Teach for America and begin my um, process that spring and then start that summer. And I was choosing between the two which one to do. And UND was going to be online, so I thought that I could tackle teaching and getting my master's degree, but that didn't pan out. So I did go into Teach for America, and I taught at Todd County Elementary School, and I kind of used the language there, and so I felt very uneasy about it. Like I wasn't quite sure how much language to use. I wasn't quite sure how much of it to like use as like transitions and in routines versus like explaining the language, because I think there's a difference between the two.
And this is a public school.
Yeah, public school. So I wasn't sure, like, okay, nape is your hand versus like nape yoka tape, and then like showing them and like having them all raise their hand. Um, like, the difference between those two things where it becomes like, like when you ask kids questions, you're always saying raise your hand, raise your hand. So like, might as well say it in Lakota, right? Anyways, the kids, sometimes I would say we did start off like that way, and sometimes I'd be like raise your hand, and then they would say nape yukata. They would correct me, and that was cool. Um, I remember using both Albert White hats and LLC because I wasn't sure which one to use either. I grew up in college using um, LLC and was familiar with that, but I wasn't familiar with the stress marks. I felt like that was very overwhelming to have to remember that. And then I was totally unfamiliar with Alberts. I was like, oh my gosh. All I know is it's this dot. And so I remember like in the spring, or was it the fall? I think it was Tribal Ed came in to my classroom. Todd County, my principal, used my classroom for this professional development, and prior to that, they never used my classroom for that purpose. And so I was like, oh, okay, so Tribal Ed's coming in. We're going to be talking about language. So we're using this classroom because I had the language on the walls.
Just tokenized you.
Yeah, so I was like, okay, cool. And Cheryl Whirlwind Soldier walked in. She's like, I see, because the topic was language and how like we're working with our students, talking to them about, like native stuff, like all that. And she was like, we teach them the language. Like, do you guys teach them the language? And they were like, yeah, we do, but Rena does that. She's the Lakota language teacher, and Cheryl basically was like, well, you need to use it too. Like it's not just solely Rena's job. And she's just like, it needs to be like a collective effort, is basically what she was like alluding to. And I agreed. And she was like, this classroom in here, I see both orthographies, and you should use both of them to teach them all of it. And I was like, yeah, cool. Like, and I remember one of the other questions off topic, but she was like, do you guys talk to your students about, drugs and alcohol? And they were like, oh, the wellness, the mental health wellness does that, teacher. And I was like, man, I was like, I do. I talk to them about that. But, I was a first year teacher, and yeah. So anyway, that was my first year teaching. And I love that class. I mean, I love every class I've ever taught, but the experience of it and learning that, because besides language, it was really, tough being a native teacher in a predominantly white space. Um, yeah. So the second year of teaching, it was all online. It was a pandemic, and that was at HEDOG, and we would use the language, and I would sometimes do prayers for us in English, with some Lakota. Um, and then, oh geez, where am I now? Okay, so the school, yeah. So then the next year I had a tough time in the public schools. And so I went into Wakainji Kitu Keakti,
which is
um, the first, Children's First Learning Center. It, Owayawa OT, Owayawa OTP, OT. Yeah, so then we did PD with Makbialuta, and I was like so blown away. I was like, oh my god, like I just could not believe that the language could be spoken by such young people and that it could be used in an entire curriculum spoken all day long. Like that just blew me away. And um, at the time, like we only had a few people on the Wakainji Tokeakji like school team at that point, so we were still growing, and I felt so intimidated and nervous. I'm like, how am I supposed to do this? And but just working with Leland, and after we left Red Cloud, I remember being there and working with Gloria, Unchi Gloria, and trying to get as much translations, and even just learning how to like work with a fluent speaker like at that moment was my first time. And she's so patient, so compassionate, and so encouraging, and everyone there was, and it was such a safe and space and such a good place to like ask questions and make mistakes and try again. And no matter what you said, everyone was responding back in Lakota and smiling and giving you that look of encouragement. I remember one time I got up there and I meant to say, Le pite sanwi hecha he. And I said, instead of that, I said, for the lesson, I was like, Le walaka he. And they were all like, huh. And I was like, shit, I was expecting the pite sanwi or le duahe, I think was what I was trying to ask. And I accidentally said, le walaka he. And they were like, huh. And I was like, expecting the pate sanwi answer, and I was like, oh shit. I asked a different question, a question I meant not to ask to, and then I was like pivoting in my mind, like, okay, what do I do now? How do I try to like ask again, or do I just move on? And I remember like Matt saying like, if you don't know, move on. Like keep trying, move on to the next thing that you're gonna say in the language. So I was like, okay, move on. I moved on to the next slide, and I was like, all right, don't let that distract you or disrupt what the point of your lesson is, basically. And so I did. I moved on and I reflected back, and I used it as like a moment to be like laugh with myself, like, oh, a little mistake. And then anyway, yeah, at the school, like using the resources that we got from Makbialuta, who are so generous in the work that they do and sharing. Yeah, and just working with Leland once we got back, putting everything in English on one side, and then how he would write it in Lakota on the left side, and then eventually getting to the point of being like, okay, this sentence is pretty much the same as that sentence, and you just change a few words, and it's the same thing. So, yeah. And then just like getting to a point of being like, okay, I came up with my own sentences. Can you correct them? I'm trying to say this. And then he'd be like, oh yeah, you got, this part right, that part right, just change this to that, like basically my proofreader. And it was really good. And it got to the point where I was like, okay, I'll carry around my notebook and I'll just speak to him and try to say what I'm trying to say. And then he'll look at me. He would look at me and be like, okay, he would re-say it. And I would say, okay, oh, I would understand, like in Lakota, what he was correcting me on. And there was a few times where he laughed and I thought he was laughing at me, but it was like, he's like, it's really cool to see a young person like getting it and trying and getting it. And for me, I was like, oh my God, he's laughing at me. Oh well, who cares? Keep going, whatever. We have this lesson to do, like it needs to be translated. I need to be able to speak it. Like, let's go. um, and then there was like a few fluent speakers who visited us and like made me cry, and the criticism that came with that and the hardship that, basically being chewed out, like for either speaking wrong or my generation for not saying mini kiwichoni instead of or saying mini wichoni instead of saying mini kiwichoni. I didn't go to DAPL, which I would have, but I didn't go up to Standing Rock. I don't remember donating stuff at USD when I was in college before, but I remember being chewed out by a fluent speaker at one of our PDs for that in Rosebud, and that really burned into my brain. And I remember crying my eyes out and being like wanting to give up. And Leland like sat there and he said a Lakota prayer. He smudged and he's like, it's gonna be all right. You take what you can that's useful from fluent speakers and leave what's not useful. And that really stuck with me. And I really appreciated him saying that much because it came up a few more times where people would criticize and say something and I'm like, all right, let's just, take what's useful, leave what's not. And became stronger every time the criticism happened, like just got stronger each time. Got more confident and getting out of my comfort zone to talk to other fluent speakers that were not Leland, because Leland was like the school comfort zone. The school was a comfort zone. So getting out of that and speaking like at the gas station or with fluent speakers who I don't even know who they were. And I learned who they were like by saying Daku Nichi Apihe, Duk Deliatia. And, those questions that you use that you learn, but using them in a context like at the Buffalo Harvest at one time, talking to Wilson Cloudman and saying like knowing that he was a fluent speaker and just visiting with him. And yeah, but it's really interesting to like come across fluent speakers that have the patience and the compassion for you as a learner, and then those that are like get really frustrated and like they know that what they're trying to tell you is like not being conveyed. They're not like adequately conveying their message either in Lakota or English about the Lakota, and so like it can be frustrating. And for as a second language learner, that is really driven not taking that personal and not getting upset. But yeah, so I know teachers have a very difficult job, and doing that in immersion and learning the language is very difficult. Yeah.
But you did it.
Yeah.
For 4 years.
Oh, 3 years.
3 years.
Yeah. So if that was from 2021, the first year was pretty rough learning to speak and be conversational. Second year was way better, like much easier, not as much, time consuming, having to spend so much time on sentences. The third year, I think I got stripped back. I took like 5 steps backwards because I was working with a different class. So that impacted like the language that I had built up with those other students, like just knowing each other too. Like relationship between Tumi and Tojan and Toshka. But going to like a kindergarten class that was brand new and had no like previous language knowledge was like really tough because I had to like shorten sentences and start like from scratch again instead of using like more complex less sentences. So that was really tough, and it was a tough year in general, like as an employee too. But yeah, so now I'm at Head Start and more so like now teaching like I've been teaching like the kids, but like next year going to be teaching like the teachers and hopefully doing language classes with the teachers and like teaching them to use like the language more because the kids see them more. But yeah, have you had any like difficult or like traumatizing experiences with the language that like made you cry or second guess yourself or want to give up or anything?
Where do we start? Just kidding. No, I feel like every language learner has some sort of traumatic experience or humiliating or
Oh yeah.
whatever, but I'm trying to think. I don't know if I had necessarily anything that made me want to like give up per se. Unlike your experience, when I was at the school, I was secluded because I was in the back cooking by myself. So my only exposure or interaction was during feeding time, and that was like what 2 hours out of the day. So, and it was pretty simple. It was just what we're eating for lunch. You know, are you hungry? Do you want seconds? Things like that, like lunchroom talk. Um, hmm. I think just grieving not being in immersion school anymore. I think that's kind of where I'm at right now.
Oh yeah.
For those that don't know, I left the immersion school back in August of 24. So, still not quite a year left. But yeah, I think just grieving that because we had a lot of fun. Good and bad times, like anything. But just thinking back, like, really did propel linguistically there with the help of Leland.
Mm.
And I think that's what I miss the most is just like shooting the shit with him in the back and learning new words and asking him stuff one on one when he'd come visit me in the kitchen. Thankfully, we text every now and then, but I know he's busy and I don't want to bother him too much. So I think that's probably just my experience there with that.
Mm. Yeah. So yeah.
Kind of where we're at.
Yeah, kind of like what brings us into like today now. Um,
Still healing.
yeah. And I just like remember like when I first started at the school, like being so excited to like maybe one day be fluent. And I've like heard different people's opinions about like fluency. Like there is no one that's fluent. Like yeah, there's fluent speakers, but they're first language speakers. We all have like different levels of knowledge in the language for different subjects. So technically to be fluent like compared to English would be really different because there's things in English we don't know to how to say. And words are being created all the time, which makes sense, but also I remember one time like thinking like the possibility of being fluent was such a realistic goal because seeing like Makabialuta, like young native women teachers like speaking so well, I was like, holy shit, this is actually really possible. Like this is it, like anyone can do it. Like I absolutely love that, especially like having a shared identity of being a Native woman and being young. I was like, hell yeah. So I remember telling my dad like me learning the language and how much like I see people speaking, and he was like, yeah, but you'll never be fluent.
Hmm.
And it's like, damn. And I have a pretty decent relationship with my dad today, but we've had our rough patches and stuff before. But, sometimes the people that are the closest to you might doubt you, can doubt you, will doubt you, have doubted you, but then maybe later change their minds, supported you. Um, and that's not something to like, take too personally or to take too hard or whatever, but something just to rather notice. And so, anyway, what's your preferred method of teaching and learning, I guess, for you?
Mm, I think just working with the fluent speaker, taking attempts at saying something, and then if you get it right, kudos to you. And then if you get it wrong, then or close enough, then the fluent speaker is there to help proofread, like you said, and explain why. Or like, why would you say like Yankee versus Iotaka? Like, just little nuances like that they would explain.
Yeah. Or like inaji to like naji.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So just things like that, and then I don't know. I think just find your passion. Like for me, food, foraging it, cooking it, eating it. Those are my passions, and working with Leland to make up new words for these mainstream foods and meals.
Cuisine.
Yeah. So I'd say just find your passion, and that's a good starting point because shit, you need food to survive. You might as well learn food and language too.
Yeah.
What about you?
I would say similar. Like I learned grammar in college, and I don't know like maybe if that spoiled it or not, but being at the school like with Leland and just like making up random sentences that don't make sense, but you're trying to like convey your thought process and your idea, like in that moment you're like changing the way that you think when a fluent speaker kind of corrects you. So if you're saying like something with the English thought and it's like kind of like backwards, because English is backwards, right?
Mm-hmm.
But when you're saying that, then like a fluent speaker kind of like, or a second or strong second language learner, like if they like correct you in a good way, when they correct you and they're like re-say it, then it's like, okay, you realize that immediately your thought process that you're structuring your words into the sentence is like the other way around, because you can pick out the words that you used. Then it's like doing that over and over so many times, like you're basically learning grammar, but it's like more speech and
Written.
non-written, and it's more verbal focused, so that you're focusing on like your thought process more, and you're starting to like, whoa, you John, like think that way. That's how I prefer it, is like that. But I feel like I'm pretty comfortable with being corrected. I've gotten to a point of being like corrected, and I think because I've had a really good experience of being corrected, like with Leland, um, and so I can handle the correction. And like Dwayne, sometimes like I would say something to Dwayne, and he would like say it again in Lakota back to me. And he's kind of like, um, he would be like, he would say it, and then I would say it, and then I'd be like, oh, huh. And then, he would just leave it at that. It wasn't like over explained or anything, or, you know, going into a grammar lesson of why or whatever. Sometimes that's, kind of all you really need too.
And not even getting to that point of like you're saying it wrong. It's just in the moment teaching. Like you don't even. It's such an unnecessary comment. I feel like.
Yeah.
And he didn't say that.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. And so that's my preferred way. In regard to like teaching, I think like immersion, like just speaking it and just being around it. And they always say that too, like speak it in the home, whatever you're doing, just speak it. And like in regard to teaching, I feel like it has to be consistent enough for it to be like immersion. Because ever since like teaching like at Wakayuji Kito Keirekichi, like I don't feel like I can go back to like teaching in an English setting. Like using English to explain the language is so hard for me now because I've gotten so comfortable with just doing it in immersion where it's actually very you're avoiding English speech. Like say anything. Like that's how it was instilled into me from Matt at Makapialuta. It's like whatever you're saying is, as long as it's not English, you're working towards that. And as a beginner for me, it was like any way you say it, you're getting the point across in Lakota, and you're not using English, so that's a win. That's how I understood it. Was like the more you cannot use English, the better.
Mm-hmm.
And then later figure out if you're saying it, correctly or a good way to say it. Because there's multiple ways to say things too.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, so we're about at an hour. What do you have anything else that came to mind or thoughts that you want to share?
I don't think so at the moment. I think we got caught up pretty quickly through our journeys. And I think now, like, for myself, still in a healing era, as I call it.
Yeah.
Like, it's on the record now. I'll commit a little bit more time, seriously, to learning again. I took a long-ass break.
Yeah, I think we need that sometimes, too, for ourselves.
So I think just saying that out loud, like, even if it's like 10, 15 minutes to learn a new word and how to say it and how to use it, I would count that as a win for myself right now, where I'm at. So y'all heard it here first.
And I think a lot of people can resonate with that too. Because not everyone can like make their 8 to 5 job language. Like even right now, like with the job that I have being Lakota language and culture, like I get to focus on those things. Those are my top of mind priorities that I work on for the day. And not everyone has that fortune or to be in immersion either. Like I love immersion. I love seeing immersion work and so proud of immersion teachers because it's so hard and they're doing such great work with our kids. But it is very like, fortunate to be able to do that and commit your whole family and self to that. So shout out to all of y'all doing language work and yeah. And everything helps, everything that you are learning, words here and there and concepts or whatever it be, conjugations, cultural things that go with the language, even learning from other indigenous languages and tribes that have been successful. So I think that we're about done. And we will have guests on to share their language journey, where they will share about what it was like for them. And yeah, excited to hear other people's stories and experiences. Alright, we're all done, so we'll see you guys later. Hope you enjoyed the episode.
Dokshake.
Dokshake wachi ang kapik day. Naya kupik day. Okay, see ya.